This is the latest version of the Renault Clio, a car that has been on our roads since 1990. Can you imagine that? 1990. Can anybody else remember 1990? I can only just barely, I have to admit. Anyway, this is not an all-new model. This is a heavy update of the existing Clio. And as you can see, the biggest changes are down here in the front, where we get new lights, a rather more aggressive-looking grille with the new, slightly more skeletal Renault logo that kind of harks back to the 1960s. And on this range-topping Espirit Alpine model, you get this big shape and style here in the front bumper that's meant to mimic the front wing of a racing car, because of course Alpine is Renault's racing brand as well as the manufacturer of its sporting models. Nice little Alpine badge here on the front wing, just gives a little frisson of that sports car excitement about it. The changes aren't massive, but this is the E-Tech hybrid version. So this gets 140 horsepower, 1.6 litre petrol hybrid engine, and this takes on the ever popular Toyota Yaris hybrid rather head on. Although it's worth pointing out that this is very definitely not a cheap car anymore. This particular one in Alpine spec with the hybrid, this is 34,000 euros. And change, which is a lot of money. The cheapest Clio you can get now is the 90 horsepower 1.0 litre 3-cylinder petrol engine version, the TCE engine as it's called, and that can be had for 24,000 euros. Still not what you call spectacularly cheap, but at least a bit more affordable than this one. And indeed, that does raise the question. I mean, for 35,000 euro, you can now get quite a lot of very long-range EVs, electric cars. So is it still worth going for a hybrid? And how will things shake up when Renault's new all-electric and utterly gorgeous Renault 5 comes on the scene in just a few weeks' time? Well, let's take a closer look at the Clio and see how it's stacking up. I think the interior is one of the Clio's strongest points, actually, because it's definitely taken a step up in quality, and particularly in this expensive Espirit Alpine model. You get lovely Alpine stitching on these high-backed leather bucket seats. You get a nice little French flag detail over here on the corner of the dash. You get fabric coverings instead of just plain old plastic. It all looks and feels really nice, and actually a little bit more plush than what you get in that big rival, the Toyota Yaris hybrid, which feels a little bit more utilitarian inside. In this high-spec model, there are some nice touches: heated seats, heated steering wheel, fabulous on a day like today where it's struggling to get above freezing. As standard, you get a 10-inch digital instrument display here for the hybrid. You also get this nice 9-inch touchscreen, which is not as slick as Renault's more recent offerings. This is not the Google-based system that Renault also offers. It's a slightly older software, and it's fine. A little bit more fiddly than ideally it needs to be. One of the nice things about the hybrid is that you get the automatic gearbox, of course. Quite a complicated automatic gearbox, but it does work well. More importantly, you get this automatic gearbox shifter, because the manual gear shifter on a Clio kind of feels unnecessarily big and clunky, and this just looks and feels a lot more classy. Got a nice little row of proper physical heating and air conditioning controls down here. That's a big bonus. You've got 2 USB slots, a 12-volt socket, and an aux-in line for people still going a bit old school with their music and entertainment. There's a small storage box here under the armrest, 2 reasonably sized cup holders down here, and the door bins are actually not bad for a car of this general size. They're actually quite roomy. It does look and feel very well finished in here, I have to say. Again, the new Renault logo sits at the centre of the steering wheel, and this being the Alpine, you get the nice French tricolor stitching here on the inside of the leather-bound steering wheel. That's a very nice touch. Not sure if it would look and feel quite so nice in a more basic model, and there are a couple of build quality issues. If I push my leg against the center console there, it does bend and buckle a bit, it's not great. And I noticed earlier that when the heating fan was up high, there's an annoying whistle coming from somewhere inside the mechanism. So little things like that do still need attention, I think. But on the whole, quality, fit, finish do look and feel very good in here. What's it like in the back, though? Well, as you can see, with the front seat set for myself, there's not a lot of space in the back. It's okay, and if the driver, in fairness, was prepared to budge up a bit, it would probably be absolutely fine. But if I've got that seat comfortable for me, I'm not comfortable back here, I'm afraid. Knee room is certainly very tight. There's also not a lot of foot room, although I am wearing quite chunky boots today, obviously because the weather's not so great. Headroom's fine. I'm just about starting to brush the roof lining with my hair, but it's okay. Not really enough room here in the middle for someone, unless they're very skinny or you just really don't like them. But on this high-spec model, you do get nice seat back pockets, although there's no rear ventilation and no heating controls or anything like that, and certainly no heated seats, which is a bit of a shame, but I guess, you know, it is a small car. One can't go expecting luxury fixtures and fittings. The boot is actually quite reasonable. The load lip is quite deep, so if you're putting in and out heavy things, that's a slight demerit, but it's not too bad, and it is certainly big enough to be useful, at least. Do you know, I think this is the nicest variant of the current Clio that I've driven so far. As I said earlier, it definitely helps that it has an automatic gearbox, because that takes away one of the poorer contact points of the standard Clio, that chunky gear shifter. But it's overall smooth and pleasant and has reasonably brisk performance, and it's certainly very economical. Renault claims 4.2 litres per 100 kilometres average fuel economy. I think, you know, if most of your mileage is sort of around town and on country roads, you'll definitely get down to about 4.5 pretty easily. Up here on the motorway, it's still pretty impressive. It's averaging in and around 5 or just under litres per 100 kilometres, that is. So it is tremendously economical. Now, it's not the smoothest hybrid. It's not quite as smooth and as quiet as the one that Toyota uses. When you ask for full acceleration, sorry, that's just the lane departure warning telling me that I'm getting a bit too close to the white line over there, which I suppose is helpful, but not entirely warranted at this point. The Toyota system is definitely more refined. When you ask for full acceleration in this Clio, the engine does growl and rev up, and it gets a bit wearing on a long uphill acceleration phase, like when you're going up a long motorway entrance ramp. But the rest of the time, it's pretty refined. There's good, useful electrical assistance. There's a system by which you can actually top up and save some charge in the battery for conducting a few electrical only maneuvers, although it is not a plug-in hybrid and it won't run on the battery for very long at all. The idea, of course, is that as it's a conventional hybrid, you try and run for short bursts as much as possible on the battery. So around town, you know, you can rack up significant electric-only mileage just by using this hybrid. Up here on the open road, of course, hardly any battery power at all. It's all down to the engine, really, at these sorts of speeds. The cabin, as I said, is definitely a high point. The seats are excellent. They're really comfortable on a long journey like I'm doing today. And it's not too bad on the refinement front. A little bit of tyre roar, a little bit of wind noise, particularly around these little quarter lights and the door mirrors. But in general, a pretty comfortable thing. It doesn't feel like a small car out here on the big road. Of course, it isn't a particularly small car anymore, even though it's one of the smaller cars we'll drive this year. It's a shame that rivals like the Ford Fiesta have been killed off. I do think it faces some very serious competition in the shape of the Skoda Fabia, which is even more practical overall, has more rear seat space, has more boot space, is extremely well built, but does crucially lack any sort of hybrid option. So it is nice to have the hybrid powertrain here in the Clio, even if it isn't the best of the hybrids. It also does affect the ride quality, the extra weight of the hybrid setup and the battery. They have stiffened up the suspension a bit, so particularly at low speeds around town, you will find a bit more. It's not that it's particularly harsh in any sense, but the suspension is quite noisy in how it reacts, and that makes it seem a bit more uncouth than perhaps it really is. So that's a bit of a shame. It's also a shame just how damn expensive it is. I mean, I know this is the top spec model, and fair enough. It was never going to be the cheapest car, was it? But I think €35,000 for a Clio, that's a bit stiff. Even though I do love the Espirit Alpine add-ons and this lovely dark blue colour, that's all very nice. But I do think the biggest problem for this car is going to be the, hopefully, fingers crossed, very affordable, fully electric Renault 5 EV coming down the pipe. We'll get to see it properly for the first time in a few weeks, and it will be on sale before the end of the year. And I do think that is potentially a bit of a superstar car. And if it lives up to expectations, it's going to give this Clio a very hard time. As hybrids go, it's actually quite pleasant, and it's certainly very effective when it comes to saving you fuel, but in the face of a really well sorted all-round fully electric direct rival that's sitting in the same showroom, I don't fancy its chances much at that point.